Good. Yes.
Madowika, Nanania saw Dustin Tamakera, Makadua Tamakera drives them out. Sukutsukani, Wakuse Okwe. My name is Dustin Tamakera, professor of Native American Cultural Studies here at OU. Came back home a few years ago, and it's good to be home. I'm Comanche with my relatives. I see one of my relatives here and recognize Miss Nonai. Relatives from Cache, Indahoma, Walters, Temple. I can say that in this state, and some people actually know the towns I'm talking about. It didn't work out so well in Champaign, Chambana, and University of Illinois, or even at UT Austin. So I'd say it's near Lawton. They're like, where's that? Hey. And I see Holly, one of my new favorite artists from Lawton. Good to see you, Holly. A lot of familiar faces, new faces. I'm still kind of sweating a little bit. I just literally ran in, me and my pony, had to go pick up my daughter real quick, get her to work, get back. We're here. And beautiful weather out there. Hey, sunny. Life's an improv is the way I kind of go with things. There is not really much of a script, even though I have these notes here. I'll borrow from Mary. Mary said earlier about bead making. It can be a good mess. And yeah, this is my left-handed chicken scratch up here. It halfway makes sense. But I do have a few questions for our guest today. And then also hopefully we'll have some time for seeing what good thoughts that y'all have. Speaking of my daughter a moment ago, she actually, before she went into her workplace, here in this state where the politics are obviously really mixed, always have been, perhaps always will be, although I do talk about something I call post-Oklahoma. But she handed me the sticker that says stand up for science. She said, I can't take this into my work. It won't go over well. She didn't want to get in trouble. But she was there. I was heartened to drive over to Norman High School, picking her up just a little bit ago. And there's a group of young people out there holding up their signs. I had not seen that much at Norman High in these past 4 years, but there's students out there in support of really good things. And it's just really heartfelt. It's really heartfelt. Today, in this session, Creative Writing and Native American Belongings in Museums, we're joined with two really cool human beings, really cool playwrights, Beth Piatote, Madeline Sayet, and they'll introduce themselves here in a moment. But just thank you all for being here. There's a lot of places you could be, and you're here, right where we're meant to be. There's been a lot of good energy from last night on to today, a lot of good words. Just a lot of good words. A lot of, as my colleague said earlier, as Mel said earlier, a lot of there's hard work and there's the heart work. And we keep going forth and doing that. And I know even as we speak and come together and share in this space right now, there's a lot of anxiety, a lot of fear. Some may have some optimism, but I am really heartened and inspired by my relatives, by my late auntie, who taught some of us in this room. My late auntie, Juanita Pataponi, who said that when the stories come together and when the people come together, that's when the magic happens. And I love magic. A textbook definition will tell you it means making the impossible possible. And it happens over and over. There is so much incredible mystery. And I know I'm in an academic space. I know I'm an academic. I've been in this game for a long time. And you have to cut through certain things. And I'm thinking especially of some students in the room right now, some really good and inspiring students who these words that we're going to share, they're for everyone. They're especially for the students. And I even start thinking about for students' grandkids for when that happens. And so I hope there's something humbly that there's something good that you carry with you. Wow, that was kind of serious. Hey, so now let's get like this. Hey. I have an Apache brother who tells me just to put the notes away and just speak from the heart. So I would like to first just ask Beth and Maddie, if you would just tell us a little bit about who you are, where you come from, these two fundamental questions that our Department of Native American Studies here at OU, for me, I think for a number of us, those are the two guiding questions before we get into all that intellectual and all that critical knowledge that is so important and become such tools to be able to use to do what you have to do and to go forth with your purpose. It's being able to respond to these questions, and the answers may change, as they should, from year to year and decade to decade. It's not about time. It's just about where you're at right now. And just want to basically just turn it over to y'all and first just ask you to speak, to introduce yourselves, of who you are and where you come from, and then we'll go from there.
I don't know why I felt like it was going to you, but now go, yeah. Sorry.
Tats halach oikaloma liloitza tats eshpain katsiya Dustin and Maddie katsiya oikaloma. Thank you everyone who's here today. It's really an honor. Wenakisa Beth Payatot Inwes Nimipu Walawa Pa Kanish. My name is Beth Payatot, and I am Nez Perce from the Wallowa Band. I am also, German farmer people and I grew up with my dad's family in Southeast Idaho. And my mom's people come from North Idaho and Eastern Washington and what is now Eastern Washington and Eastern Oregon. And Oklahoma is a really important place to me, even though I've only been here a few times in my life. Been thinking about this a lot. Hearing people talk about what Oklahoma is. For us, after the War of 1877, my family was imprisoned in a prison camp in Oklahoma, and it was called the Hot Place. That's how people remember it. It's the Hot Place. And so we experienced our exile here, but it was also our home for a short time. And so our history is also tied into your land here with all of you. So it's really an honor to be here, and I'm very honored by this opportunity to have this conversation and also have this conversation over this whole symposium. So grateful to Emily and to everybody who worked hard to put it together. I'll just say I'm a writer and I'm a language activist. I've been working on my Indigenous language for the last 20 years. And my aunt and uncle were first language speakers, but because our family was separated, my mom and her sisters were not. So I feel like so many of the choices that we make, we were talking earlier about healing, and I think so many of the choices that we make every day about the things that we love and turn our attentions to, and the words that we carry on our breath, all of these things are very big, very big gestures in the big scope of things. So, katsia, yohkalo.
Wait, do I have to hit a button? Cha Natiwis Chokais. Hi, I'm Maddie. I'm a citizen of the Mohegan tribe in Connecticut. Everybody said such profound things already. Now I'm like thinking about those things, and it got me a bit off my mind. But in a good way. So I'm what am I? I mean, so I grew up in Connecticut with my people. My family has been very involved in tribal leadership for generations, and so I was raised with a very strong accountability for who we are and how we pass down our stories. But for a long time, I didn't really engage so much with that artistically. I think because of the pressure of it. So for a long time, I was a director working predominantly in contemporary Native theater and also reimagining Western classics. And it was only fairly recently that I started to write things or engage with things that are more personal, that are Mohegan stories in terms of like the artistic space. I was doing a lot of directing work for other Native playwrights and helping them tell their stories for a long time. And so it's been an interesting journey because that it flipped so quickly into the minute I started doing that, it became so public so quickly. So I wrote a play. I'd gone over to the UK to pursue a PhD in Shakespeare, and when I came back, I had this strange sensation because I'd been flying from place to place to place to place, where it was the first time I came home to my homelands, and it didn't feel like my feet rooted quite right. Like up until then, whenever I'd come home, it was like I landed and it was like whew, down to the ancestors. You know, it was like a very clear sense of grounding, and I had this like up in the air feeling that was very strange to me. And so I started writing a play that wasn't a play at the time. It was just me trying to process the fact that I was up here and whether or not I could come back down. That turned into a play called Where We Belong, and then went on a national tour. And so it was a very interesting kind of journey to kind of expose thoughts and feelings that are very private. And at first, not necessarily something you're comfortable sharing, and then ultimately seeing the ways in which that can have an impact on other folks and their ability to feel brave and tell their stories and things like that. So I'm thinking a lot, I think right now, about sort of the space between like I guess like the fears we all carry, I think, for ourselves and also our families and things like that. And then also the space of like speaking things into the world that then do have the possibility of shifting what then the next person is able to say, and the next person is able to say, and the next person is able to say, what those openings are. And I don't really know what that is, but that's just sort of what's on my mind right now, especially thinking about like the bravery of a lot of young folks like you were talking about.
No, thank you. And thinking about the good words y'all are saying in relation to the key word of this and the title of this symposium, belonging. You know, when I see that word belonging, it I start kind of flipping it around and thinking of longing to be, and what it means to be, but this ongoing journey that we as a human species, I think everyone in the room is of the species. I've been watching a lot of Resident Alien on Netflix, so I'll say that out of respect, that if you are a gray, if you are, then I have nothing but respect for you, because this is I come from a people where we have old stories and newer stories and experiences with human kin, and but it's not like those bad reality shows, what I call bad, of chasing Bigfoot and chasing after, we have our own insider names, the Muppets and others for these beings and as kin. And just thinking about in the history of colonization and ongoing decolonization, there's as one of our relatives, Elder LaDonna Harris, who has long said there's this ongoing struggle, and it's very vivid right now of the P's versus the R's, the power and profit versus the R concepts of relationality and reciprocity and respect, redistribution of wealth and of goods, and of just really sharing. And thinking about a recent paper that a Yale professor wrote about the current times of reality versus unreality. And I think about, when it comes to our storytelling, when it comes to these creative writing practices that I'm leading into my next question on, it's thinking about, with process, the creative process for folks in this space and elsewhere, and the challenges that go with that when speaking only for myself, of wanting to be and just letting myself be and letting others be. The Beatles, as I've long said, they had it figured out a long time ago. My auntie LaDonna Harris had it figured out before them, but it's to let it be, to let it be. So much profound truth in that. And that power can be, as one of my uncles says, power can be a good thing when it's used in a good way and not abused. And so it's along the lines of thinking what it means to. I also come from a tribal tradition where um, we are individuals and we are also community. And I know that, especially for some young people and older alike, there's times when other people try to box you in, and they'll try to say that this is how you should be, this is how you should dress, this is how you should sound. And I've always dug being around the people who just accept you for who you are and recognize that we're all on some kind of journey. And as I age, I think more and more about where we truly come from, and who we truly are and where we may be going. And also thinking about when it comes to our medicine, or what we call puha, when it comes to our medicine, our strengths, our purpose, for those who are storytellers. And I know some use that label in very intentional ways. I would venture to say we all are storytellers. We all are creative. I very much come from that school of thought and can follow that. But I'd like to ask Beth and Maddie if you would share some with us on, and in the interest of healing, because you can never have enough conversations about healing. Um, there is I think it was Dr. Bordeaux saying earlier, about how isolating it can be, how, in academia, and we're all in that, and creative academics, if you will. And so it's thinking about how isolating it can be. Um, but I also like to think of, when it comes to writing, that it's not so much of a self isolation or imposed, but more of, I think, something with for me, a more positive connotation, and that is solitude, of what it means to, when it comes to your process. I assume there must be so much solitude to get done what you have to get done for your creative work, but also just from based on very brief visits with you earlier, and with especially based on the excellent readings, the work that happened last night of each of their plays, with Antigone and with Where We Belong. And I know a number of you were here for that, over in the old science building. I just wondered if you could talk to us some about this, what for me is not a split, but it's just about being in solitude and getting your work done, but also being in community. Like, of how, let me frame it this way, of just your process. The short of it is, could you talk to us some about your creative process and words of humble wisdom you may have for young creatives and older creatives alike in the room, of just how you do what you do, as whether it's how you prepare for a writing session or how it comes to collaborating with others, especially with productions. Once the script becomes more than just a script and it goes into production and goes on these national tours and things like that and takes you into all kinds of unexpected adventures. Thoughts on process?
Okay, sorry. I mean, it depends on the project. I mean, like with anything, I like to be very intentional about sort of what it is that I'm doing, and therefore how I kind of I guess make work in that regard. So I think specifically when it comes to writing, I tend to usually sort of start with questions. Where We Belong actually started with like this question of, does missing England as a Mohegan person make me a traitor? Um, specifically in 2018 when I moved back, I had been under that first term of Trump's presidency. I had been living in England up until that point, and so I had things like socialized healthcare and certain things that like it actually felt like less indigenous in some ways to be leaving certain principles that in my mind shouldn't be associated with England, but it was like weird because I was like, well, actually, America doesn't have some of these things, even though that's where my people are. Um, so knowing that those things weren't neutral, but also knowing that I had this complicated history, I started grappling with that question, which then led to this other question of, as an indigenous person in like a globalized society, is there a place where we get to belong? And just grappling with those questions, kind of, and thinking about um, who needs to come with me in order to kind of grapple with that is sort of a lot of how that play was formed. What does it mean to be a wolf and a bird? Like those questions, and the ancestors who are inevitably involved in those kind of questions, because I knew I had ancestors who had gone to the UK before me, who were very present in my journey there. Like they had to be a part of figuring that out. And so that particular play kind of evolved from there. But it's very often I'm working on adaptations. If I'm dealing with adaptation, I deal a lot with this question of like, what do you want to carry forward and what do you want to leave behind? Like what are the things in the source text, if it's like a non-indigenous text, or if it's like a Western classic, that still feel meaningful and still feel important, by juxtaposition, like what are the things that are no longer of interest to you? And then also sometimes I'm working on pieces that are very historical for my nation, and that works a little bit like adaptation, but with my mother uh, being very strict in my face about, like, you can't adapt that. That has to be like this, which is good. I like that. That way I have a lot of accountability. You know what I mean? It's not really adaptation. It's adaptation insofar as there are pre-existing characters that you're thinking about from a moment in time, knowing that you're not them, but always, I think, spiritually sort of trying to stay in alignment with them and why they made the decisions they made, with all of the historical and cultural knowledge that we have now. That's sort of like, blah, blah, blah. But those are all very different. I feel like they're very different processes, and I think because I came to playwriting specifically from those other spaces, it's actually the hardest thing to do is when I'm trying to write indigenous futurisms, or I'm trying to write fiction, is like the hardest because I'm so used to grounding in these things that are very very real. And when I'm actually like in the space of like imagining beyond pre-existing characters and things, for me, I don't think writing is like super isolating for me insofar as I can't start writing, and this, I don't know, this sound depends on the writer, but like I can't start writing until I hear talking. So I'm not like writing abstractly, like I'm hearing it and I'm just writing it down as I go. So if characters are talking, then I'm writing. If the characters, if it's a play with a lot of characters and they haven't started talking, I can't start writing yet. So that's in some ways like much more straightforward when they're ancestors, or folks who I'm really familiar with, who I feel like are talking to me all the time anyway. Whereas if it's like hyper fictional characters, sometimes I'm like, or if it's like there's a play I wrote about my descendants, and that was really hard for me because I was trying to imagine a future of hope for them, and getting to a place where I could even start writing that way was really difficult. Anyway, that was sort of all over the place, but honestly, I teach graduate dramatic writing at ASU right now, and I sort of encourage everyone to kind of come from where they are in the process. Like however you want to start writing, it's about getting something out there. It's not about editing it before it's out. So whatever your process is for just getting something out, that's I feel like the right one for whatever it is that you're trying to do.
Um, Thank you, Maddie. I think I can relate to a lot of what you're saying, especially like having characters talking to you or, things coming through you. And so I never feel like I'm writing alone. I'm always there's some. So I think the other way that I think about it is that I'm always writing for other Native people. And my motivation for writing is for other Native people to be in the company of this book and in the company of these characters and the company of these stories and to not feel lonely. And I realized at one point, like, it's because I'm very lonely. Like it was like creating these characters and creating this book thinking was, and so my book, The Bead Workers, is very much about urban communities and also reservation relatives and all kinds of there are all kinds of settings, but most of them are in the Pacific Northwest. And the book is very much grounded in the Pacific Northwest and in the West. And it's because I missed home so much. And so I just kept recreating it for myself to be in its company. But also, I think what I hope other natives experience with my book is the feeling of being in a native context. And because I when I'm writing, when I'm reading something, even by a native writer, and all of a sudden I feel them explaining something, or then I'm like, oh, I'm not the audience, right? So part of what my book is trying to do is to center a native audience, and the way I do that is by not explaining, or doing that sort of. And so in creating Antigone, that was also like wanting to have a Native family at the center, and all the messiness of that was much more interesting to me than I think a lot of Antigone adaptations in a colonial context have been about, like the white museum director and the Native people or whatever. And I'm like, well, that's too easy. The hard thing is when you're a family that loves each other, and your love for your family and for your way of life is being distorted by the colonial system. I mentioned this last night, that I wrote part of the play in the National Museum of the American Indian. And so I feel very much that those beings and belongings helped me write. And actually, there were lines that I borrowed from that space that appear in the book. And when I wrote it for the book, I didn't think of it as a play. And I think it's interesting to hear that you didn't start yours as a play either. I just thought of it as a story. Like, this is the way to tell a story, is in this form of a play. So the last thing I want to say about that is, then when it did move toward being a play for the stage, I realized how amazing and collaborative the world of theater is. And I got to work with Maddie and all of these amazing actors and artists. And just the collaboration is so amazing. And I think, now when I come into a theater, I can like almost feel the collaboration that has created that piece. So when you're in the audience, you feel that warmth, and there's been a good collaboration in that space. The last thing I would say is, I got the idea that there was a relationship between ancestral remains and Antigone, Sophocles' Antigone, in 1996, when the one who became known as the Ancient One, or Kennewick Man, was pulled out of the Columbia River. And our tribe and all the Columbia River tribes were saying, he's ours, we want him back. And the state, took hold of him. I remember standing in my kitchen going like, what's wrong with these people? Don't they read their own literature? And from that moment, I wanted to somehow implicate Western culture on its own terms. But I didn't get around to writing it until as a play until like 2016, 2017. And it turned out that from the moment I thought of the relationship to when I actually wrote the play and finished it was the exact arc that it took to bring the Ancient One home. So 21 years from when the Ancient One was extracted to when he was returned and reburied was 2017, exactly the same month actually that I finished writing this play. And so there is some, when you talk about like who are you writing with, I do feel like there is something that was being loosened up through all of the advocacy of our people for all of those years, that the play was able to come to me as part of that unlocking and a part of that process of return.
Can I add something to that really quick? Okay. I think there's also something interesting to this thing of who you're writing for, sometimes how it shifts, because Where We Belong originally, the very first version that wasn't supposed to be a play, basically it was like 20 minutes it was basically like a confession. It was like, I'm in this state of being and I feel like I'm not allowed to, like, I feel like this thing of feeling not connected was like kind of horrifying to me. And so I kind of created this like environment in which I was processing it on a stage in Dixon Place, which is this like small pub just for friends and family, just because I didn't know how to process something other than by being on a stage. And it was really that moment was healing, but not all moments related to the play were healing. And so it's interesting because I feel like a lot of times with that particular play, because it's so personal, a lot of whether or not it's healing had to do with autonomy and how much control I felt like was in like my hands or Native hands or Mohegan hands versus white hands as the piece kind of got shuffled around over time. And because I knew originally, once it was a quote unquote play, it was being it was going to be performed for the first time at Shakespeare's Globe. It was an instance in which I actually wasn't writing specifically for Native audiences. I was actually writing because I was like, I have something to say to you people over there. Like it was like a very specific context. And weirdly, the reason why they wanted it performed was this very British viewpoint, which was they were like, "Oh, it's so interesting. Like you came over here and you were watching us." And I was like, "We are always watching you. Like it's not new. Like what did you think was happening like this whole time? Like did you think it was like I was like it was like such a bizarre thing, right? To say be like, "Oh, like we're the ones being witnessed." And I was like, "You've always been witnessed." Like that never wasn't happening, and so but because of that context, it was once I knew it was going to be done again in the States, what I specifically did was I actually gathered, because I'm so used to working on theater collaboratively, because I'm used to also being like doing like as a director working on a lot of Native plays with like I've never directed a play with less than like eight or nine characters. Like I've never directed a small play. For some reason, I'm always directing big plays, which is great because it means I get to be in dialogue and really talk to a group of people about like all of the things that make a world full. You know what I mean? And so I brought together a group of Native folks, specifically at that moment of my generation or younger, to read the play and be in dialogue as I developed the script, to make sure that we were being accountable to the future was specifically the prompt. At that moment, I was like, if it's going to be performed in America, I want to make sure that we're thinking about what it means. And so for me, actually, I think one of the more healing experience, like one of the kinds of healing experiences I've had really with that play have been when students either see it or engage with it, or like last night when Maggie performed it, that was very healing for me because I got to watch someone working through things they're experiencing and dealing with right through the play, as opposed to this other context that sometimes happens in theater where it was like they were like, oh yeah, we like you doing that, so you must do that every day, sometimes twice a day, for a year in a row. We want you to have your mental breakdown over and over and over and over and over again, which inevitably makes you a little crazy. So if you weren't already, which I might have been, but that thing of like, they don't understand that structurally to inhabit something like that is actually not it's not acting, right? It's like if it's actually your own experiences, re-inhabiting your own experience isn't acting. So it's not the same as writing something in creative nonfiction where it's on a page, if then you have to go back into it over and over again. So I think there's also, I think this is what I'm trying to get to this, is there's also like a carefulness and a mindfulness, I think, of thinking about like the lines between different forms, and like when is it important to be with community, when is it important for those people to be around you, what do you not want to have to experience over and over again, when is that actually for someone else to embody, like those kinds of questions I think are also really important, because a lot of that just gets taken for granted in theater, because things get thought of, especially with Native folks, and especially because in a situation like that, like most of the venues it was being performed in, it was the first Native play happening there. And we had a lot of, I had all of these protocols around it to make sure other Native art was in the space and being seen and things, but even still, it gets treated like fiction. Like they don't really, white institutions don't really know how to see us as real. And so even if it is your own experience and you say over and over again, it's painful for me to perform this over and over again, they can't really understand it. I don't know why. That was the end of my long rant.
Thank you. Thank you both for that. And along those lines of healing, and, and thank you both for reaffirming that, for so many Native writers, it is not just this isolation, that there is this of ancestors being with you and of communicating, and it's not about taking stories. Or like I heard an elder a long time ago say, yeah, people talk so much about just, I want to take a nap. I took a nap. I took this. I took that. Take. He said, what would it be like if we start flipping and saying to receive a nap and to receive these stories? And that's what happens, right? And this is difficult to articulate. This is almost ineffable to really, English language will fail. It has its limitations, but there are these very intimate, as a playwright myself, there have been certain intimate moments that I cannot explain to you what happened in that writing process. So that was a very difficult question. If I actually did ask a question earlier in the rambling, that of like how you do what you do, because it is so personal and personable, but it's also in relation, right? And it's this belonging and longing to be once again. And it is, I'll tell you from my own experience, for a long time, I denied it. I denied the storytelling medicine. And I think there may be others in the room who can relate to that, of when you deny yourself of your medicine, of the purpose of what you're supposed to be doing, or you're questioning, maybe you're questioning right now, what is my purpose, right? What am I supposed to be doing? For all of us, and for me, everything is a story. Everything is a story. You have heard a multitude of stories today, for those who've been to the symposium, the stories last night, your grocery list, whatever they are telling stories. They are stories, right? And these stories that we receive, some of which we share. I've also been hearing a lot of talk from last night on to today about, and especially in the earlier panel, about, who do we carry with us, right? Who do we carry with us? And it took me right back to a workshop. We've all worked with Native Voices at the Autry, run by the amazing Delana Studi, Sisseton Cherokee Nation. If you didn't know, one of Delana's main catchphrases is, the revolution will happen on stage. The revolution is in theater. That's no offense to the other artists in the room, but there's plenty of room for collaboration. But please, it's thinking, but we're centering theater here for right now, and thinking about the sound artists who work in theater and everyone who makes that possible. And I remember stepping into my first workshop for a play I'm working on called Comanche Girl on the Moon, and I'm working with the Autry and I'm working with Children's Theater Company in Minneapolis, and the director they brought in for the first workshops and public readings there at Autry and La Jolla in San Diego is Princess Desiree Johnson, who is an amazing Alaska Native artist up north, and she came in. She's one of the producers of Molly of Denali on PBS Kids, and a number of other productions. And the lead actor they brought in, I was blown away. It was this young 18-year-old actor named Sovereign Bill, who is the voice of Molly on Molly of Denali. And I remember Princess leading us on day one in the workshops. And as someone who had put playwriting on hold for a long time and came back to it, um, it was incredibly healing of when she said, we would stand up, and it wasn't just, let's just jump in and start looking at the script and let's start tearing it up. Let's read through. She always had healing and community building exercises that happen at the start. And what an amazing way for a director to start things. There's the first day I think it was the second day, she said, who I want us to go around, and we would all stand in a circle and all the actors are there. And a lot of us have just met each other for the first time. She's like, who are you carrying with you today? Who's with you? And it gave us a moment to do something that is so intertwined with healing, and that is to honor. We were able to select someone. I chose my auntie. She inspired the play, her painting, her poetry. I'm just trying to put a stage of the visions that she left behind for us and what she did, and still teaching us today, even as she's crossed over. And so it was just this idea of just who you carry with you. And I'm wondering, just along the lines of healing, this might be kind of a brief kind of question, but or response, but anything come to mind on, especially as a director, of how you prepare the actors, how you prepare folks for these spaces, how you prepare yourself, as writers, as directors, again, along those lines of how you do what you do, but in relation to healing. Any additional thoughts for y'all right now?
I mean, I think for me, I became a director when I became a director at the sort of beginning of my career, right out of school. It had been because I had been in a couple different situations where we had non-native directors directing things. I wouldn't call them native plays. They were like, things with native material in them, and they would say horrible things to us, and try and get us to traditional dance to like weird electronic music with animal sounds, and like tell us to all sing the same song that we obviously don't know, like weird things. And so I actually became a director from this baseline of being like, the bar is very low to be a director. Like, it was like, if you show everybody in the room like a modicum of respect, like you'll be doing a lot better than what's going on right now. And so when I started directing, it was honestly, a lot of it was specifically about reclamation, but also specifically within the Native community, about creating a space that a lot of those actors hadn't been in, where everyone's voice was like really honored, and it was really about like what we build together. And even still, like, I feel like one of my favorite parts of the process is sort of like building the team, like, like getting to sort of like cast the show and think about like who's going to be in this room together, and how is it going to be healing, like, for this collective to come together to make this particular work. And for that reason, I think I've always kind of had this habit of like kind of like asking questions when I can in the rehearsal, in the audition room, to sort of be like, why do you connect with this piece? What, just things that kind of like bring out people's sense of self a little bit. Because I think like one of my favorite things as a director is like when people like finish the project and they're like, that was one of the best. I don't actually care as much. Not always, the playwright might not like this, but like, I don't always care as much about like how the show turns out, like, quote unquote, as a success or not, as like the what happened to get there. Also, because as a director, you leave when the show opens. So your entire life is spent in rehearsal, And so you can think about that two ways. You can either think about that as like, I'm out here making products for audiences, which fine. Or you can think about that I'm out there building a community that's then going to be, their experience is then going to be shared. And I want them to feel like they're empowered, and what they choose to then share with the people coming in. And so that's sort of how I've always seen it, which like works really well for some projects. And then some projects I'm like, that's not the right project for me. I don't think I'm as quite as like cool as Princess. So I probably don't have like great exercises for doing that. But I think like for whatever reason, people have always seen me as somebody where they feel like even when I'm not in charge, like they feel comfortable coming to me to tell me what's wrong. I just, whatever reason, I'm very non-threatening. So people just like to tell me what's going wrong. But it makes it a lot easier to solve problems. Like if everyone in the community really genuinely feels like we can come to her and we can talk this through. Because I feel like if we're going to gather as Native folks to tell a story, like just that act of gathering is itself hugely important. And I think that that's also why I really love working in spaces like Native Voices with a lot of these Native theaters. And in relationship to the who do you carry with you thing, I think when I'm thinking about a lot of that stuff, I feel like I'm always carrying with me my mentor, Bill Yellowrobe, because the way that he thought, the way that he sort of introduced me to Native theater was like a lot of he had a play. He wanted people to gather around a play. I've literally seen the man knock on people's physical doors at their houses, to get actors together to do a play. And he passed a few years ago. And so I think about that. I think about that a lot. Like just his way of always being like it's about the community first. It just always stays with me. Yeah.
Well, I want to talk about this incredible experience that I had of, having the world premiere of Antigone and having Maddie as the director, because since this was the first play I had ever written, I did all these really hard things, like stage this in the round, and it has to be staged so that the props, go back and forth between the museum and the home, like because I'm trying to make the point that like all the stuff that's in museums is like stuff that is in is from our homes. Like that's where they belong, is like on the shelf at home. And so to create these spaces where we go back and forth. And then, Maddie was, I mean, she did such a brilliant job. I mean, I was like in the audience, like, like I was like so in love with it, because by the time it was staged, it didn't even feel like so, something that I had done, because it had just transformed into this whole other world. And, we talked about the epistemology of the stories, and that, the way our stories work, and I'm sure many other traditional stories work, is like the story's told where there's just a set of things that happen, and it's up to you to figure out who you are in that story. And you're going to be all of those people at some point in your life. So I tend to think of our old stories as like time release medicine. Like these are things that we have, and it releases the medicine when we need it. And the way Maddie was able to direct the actors that then they did turn into Pissing Boy and the Bear and all these different characters just so seamlessly and beautifully. And she was able to work with this really complicated space. I mean, it was in it was performed. The whole space had to be transformed into a theater space, which then made me wonder, like, why don't we have more theater spaces in museums? Like they should be places where there is this performance. And I do know that part of, rematriation practices are about performing with our beings and belongings in museum spaces, and changing up the vibrational energy of that space by singing and dancing and breathing together with our belongings. And so I just want to say that, Maddie is such an incredibly talented person, and I could not imagine a more really magical experience than getting to stage it. And one of the things is that our show opened the like 3 days after the election. And so we knew that people would be coming in a state of, some people would be coming in a state of grief, and taking care of people in that storytelling space was so healing. And part of it is the structure of the Auntie's stories, like those taking you out into this longer arc of time, and sort of resting on that resting, like being held in that eternal vision and order of the world, I think was very healing. And to be together in the dark in this round space, all of those things, because at first we were like, what? This is opening the week of the election. Like, what are we going to do? But it turned out to be like the perfect healing space in that time. And the other thing I just wanted to mention is that in my play, if you look at the cast, you see the drum is a character in the play, and the drum is also a speaker. And so one of the things that happened in moving this Greek play, which in its origin was a spiritual play, into this colonial context, is that all the sort of moral lines got distorted. And so, people would say like, "Oh, I didn't know Antigone or Creon. I didn't know who to," and that's because because colonialism is so distorting that nobody can truly live in a way that is our old way. Like, I mean, we didn't make these institutions, but we are all born into them and have to figure our way through them. And we all have our different strategies. And the moral heart of the play moved away from Antigone as it was in Sophocles, and it moved into the antes and the drum. It's the drum that's holding like the eternal possibility and the eternal time. And so those are things going into it I didn't anticipate, but once it all came to life, I think the drum was a very healing presence and a very healing and important voice in the play.
I just want to say too that I think that there's something really, one of the things that I love about theater and about like language and theater, like Beth's play, where it's really it's poetic and holds multiple meanings, is that I feel like in that moment, in tech, in the election, and in the week that followed, like having all of those phrases to interpret and reinterpret and interpret and reinterpret, like that very action is always very healing, just to be able to sit there in that moment at the end of the play where all the text is overlapping. And one of the lines is Creon says, in the meantime, we've been living in the meantime for 500 years, and just hearing that over and over again alongside other phrases about there having been a world before, like that this is one of our worlds but not the only one. Like, just there were just so many things that I just feel like, I think for me, like that's what I really love about theater as a medium, is the fact that you as the audience sit there and you hear it, and one day it means something and then the next day it means something else, but you're together, experiencing that shift, and you can kind of feel the collective energy of like, oh, we're all in a different place today than we were in yesterday or the day before. And that I feel like was really meaningful. And for me, I think even in my own play, that was very healing, because as the world was going through cycles of different kinds of problems, performing the same text, but that went through the journeys of my own ancestors, a different ancestor's journey would like lift a little. You know what I mean? It wasn't, we never got out of the cycles like that Beth sort of makes so clear in her play, but it's like you're just landing in different pieces, different days. And it just makes the sort of circle very clear, but also the continuity, I feel like, very clear, that our peoples aren't going anywhere, and that there is that, that, I don't know, just that timelessness.
Yes. Thank y'all both. I got a few minutes for questions. Is there a mic for the audience, or do you need to borrow? Oh, it's this mic. Hey, silence me if you must. All right.
We were supposed to share these. Yeah, we were like.
So yeah, please.
Oh, we're gonna facilitate.
Yeah, thank you, Marcy. If I might to ask Beth and Maddie, both your works engage with great Western theater traditions, and specifically with like white Western male figures who are held in almost like a sacred regard in the Western canon, Shakespeare and Sophocles. And I'm so interested in that choice to reimagine those works. And I'm sure you've been asked this question 1,000 times, but I'm just wondering if you could speak to that a little bit.
sorry, Willow, do you mind to ask it again in just one
Sure,
second?
the
He's going to turn off the mic. Yes, I'm sorry.
Sorry, I'm just
Give him one.
She basically she asked, the both of the works engage with these sort of like uh, big Western canon males, old dead white guys that specifically are sort of like held in this particular kind of uh, pedestal, and sort of the choice to do that, and just in dialogue with like the why and the what around that.
Yeah, I could just, that I I specifically chose Antigone because I love that play. I read it in ninth grade and I loved it. And I think that's also decolonial, is to just I also love Shakespeare. I mean, I do. But then there are problems. But there are always problems with who and the things you love. But again, I wanted to implicate Western culture on its own terms, but I also, through telling our stories which are older than Sophocles, our stories are older than the Greeks. Reading some of those old stories, I was like, wow, their stories are so much like ours. Like, they are just as colorful and gruesome and hilarious and I wanted to also think about a conversation between these two storytelling traditions, because I thought, oh, if our old storytellers and those old Greek storytellers ever got together, they would just stay up all night. Like, this would be, and wanting to just think of pure story. Like, and I guess there is kind of a sort of like decolonial gesture in that, of like, oh, well, if Western civilization hadn't happened, if we could just share our stories like we used to, that would be like a better world. So there was kind of something utopian about like the mashup of these two traditions, and also having a chance to say like what is universal, and that was part of my initial reaction of like, what's wrong with these people? Don't they read their own literature? Like, why is Antigone considered a universal story of what the living owe the dead? Why don't they, like, it's like either they don't think we are human or they're not human. And so I, pulled out some of these old stories that are about making the world fit for humans, right? And trying to push Western culture to come to terms with the fact that they are not yet human, as long as they are cannibals and their activities are cannibalistic against us. So it was, in a way, I hope that nobody sees it as like reaching up, but that I was, well, some people do. They're like, why did you do that? Why didn't you just tell a native story? And I'm like, I did just tell a native story. Like, you know what I mean? Because it actually, like, people have asked me, like, is it a tragedy? And I'm like, no, it's not. It has a different form. Like, I think of my Antigone as like a remaking, like it's made Sophocles' Antigone into a piece of our canon. And it's changed its form so that its form actually is much more similar to our story forms. So I feel like, yeah, that's what I was thinking.
Yeah, I mean, in the case of Where We Belong, so I started my career I originally I grew up performing outdoor Shakespeare, and so I sort of like a lot of my early directing work just was Shakespeare, but then it never occurred to me that we wouldn't be in it, or that like I wouldn't just apply our philosophies to how I direct it. And so there was a period of time in which I ran an all native Shakespeare ensemble, and like, it was just, that was always a part of just my thinking around the plays, because they're poetic. I just thought, okay, well, we'll just, everyone's reinterpreting them anyway, that this, we're going to do our own thing with them and make meaning that makes sense to us. But Where We Belong, interestingly, the version at the Globe had very little reference to Shakespeare in it. The context, everybody knew the context was that I had been doing a PhD in Shakespeare, and there was like the little academics thread where they're like, talk about the Tempest, the Tempest, the Tempest. But I didn't have this whole arc that's in it now, where it's like, what does Shakespeare mean to me at different points in my life, and what am I writing my PhD about? None of that was in there. That was America. America wanted me to explain to them what my relationship with Shakespeare was. Yeah. So I mean, and I just say that because there was a interview at one point I did recently where it was like they were like, "Oh, so Where We Belong is a response to The Tempest," and I was like, "What?" Because originally there wasn't any, it wasn't in there. Like the whole point was that the only thing I said about The Tempest was people were telling me I had to talk about it. You know, there was no like I didn't actually talk about it in the play, or that like I'm quoted. I'm even like the New Oxford. Like there's a bunch of different articles everywhere that's like quoting Where We Belong as being like The Tempest is anti-colonial. I was like, except for that 3 scenes later, I say, why did I think that The Tempest was anti-colonial? I was like, it's me in my early 20s, and then I get older and I think different things. Like there's a fluctuation to society and the way that the brain works and how you interpret text over time. Okay, no, you just got that one thing and you're gonna take that. So yeah, so I think it's complicated because I do think that like, a lot of my standing as a director early in my career came from the fact that I was sort of affiliated with Shakespeare. And there's even like a line in the play where it's like, now that I'm studying Shakespeare in England, I'm asked to tell stories all over. Like it's like they're like, oh, she's in England studying Shakespeare. It wasn't even like I had done anything new. They were like, she must be more important now because she's in England studying a white man. I said, yes, that's how thought works. So yeah, so it's really complicated for me because I do think that there's a lot that people have gotten out of the Shakespeare sort of arc in it in terms of like the moment in time that it sort of arrived and a lot of the Shakespeare theaters that it was at and sort of grappling with like thinking about, what these things mean in those plays. But originally it wasn't centered in the play and it kind of became what the play seems like it's about to a lot of people. And honestly, the original structure had much more of the journey from being a wolf to being a bird tied to the Mohegan stories, and sort of the betweenness of that. So I do think it's complicated because I think that what that tells me, right, is this thing of like they need the Shakespeare in order like it's like it's it not being for a native audience because the non-native audience needs the Shakespeare in order to see me as human. If I tell them about how I feel about Shakespeare at different points in time, I can take them from how I felt about Shakespeare when it was the same as how they feel about Shakespeare to when I realize something and then they have that realization because they identified with me, right? But it's not like they're just capable of identifying with me. Why wouldn't they just be capable of identifying with me because I'm a human being? That would be nice. So I think it is really complicated. But I don't think that's anything to do with necessarily reimagining or adapting the classics. Like I actually think that part of that is can be almost anything. It can be about reclamation of a story that you were forced to learn in school, right? Like we're not suddenly going to not be taught Shakespeare in school, so we should be allowed to do with it what we want, which is why there's the whole, indigenization of Shakespeare argument. If it's going to be done, in outdoors in every on all the land across this nation, then it should be done thinking about the land that it's being told on. Like it's weird that it's not. Especially because of this like pervasive free Shakespeare thing that we have in America specifically. It's like why is no one thinking about where they're telling that story and why they're telling that story? And so being able to raise those kinds of questions, I feel like was important. But I think that even still, I have very complicated feelings about, you know, the ways I think in which stories shift. Depending on who's seen as the audience or even marketing wise, I feel like there was a lot of instances where I had to intervene in the marketing because early on people were like, it's a native girl who loves Shakespeare or something. I don't know. And then they'd come and they'd be like, this play's about colonialism. And then they'd get mad and they'd yell at me from the audience. And I'd be like, oh no, why? I don't want to be yelled at by strangers during the middle of the show. Yeah. So yeah, basically.
Wrap up our panel. Yes, but please join me in thanking Beth and Maddie and Dustin for this conversation. It's going to take a minute to change out the stage. So if you need a quick restroom break, but we'll start again in just a few minutes for the next panel, and then we'll have a longer break after this one. Thanks.
receiver.
Hi, everyone. If you would return to your seats, please, we'll get started for the next session. You'll have a longer break with coffee and snacks after this session. And Dr. Annika Johnson is chairing this session and will also begin sharing some research and thoughts with you all. And then you'll hear from artist Holly Wilson, and then we'll have them in conversation. Thank you.
Let's just use these. Oh, here we go.
Was there another image?
There we go. Okay. Okay. Yes. All right. Thank you. Hello, everyone. It is so wonderful to be here. I feel like I've already had just amazing conversations, and I can't wait to continue those conversations. This is my first time in Norman, Oklahoma. So thanks to the university and the department and the Russell Center, to everybody being so inviting. This is truly a really special event. I guess I'm chair of a panel, but there are two of us. It's me and Holly Wilson. John Pepion couldn't make it to the conference, so he has an illness right now, so we're thinking of him today. I really wish that he could have been here to join us. So if he's watching virtually, hello, John, we wish you were here. So I'll speak for a little bit, then Holly will share a little bit about her work, and then it'll be just the two of us, Holly, on stage chatting. So I'm just going to talk about a recent project that I worked on at the Joslin Art Museum. I like to put a picture of the museum on any PowerPoint when I'm traveling, just so people have a visual. The Joslin's in Omaha, Nebraska. I curate the Native American art collection there, but I really work across a lot of different departments and collecting areas. We're a pretty small but mighty team. And one of the major projects we just worked on was a complete reinstallation of the museum. So we built a new Hawks Pavilion, so this like really beautiful building. And as part of that, we took everything off the walls in the two existing pavilions on the museum's campus. And this is sort of a dream for a curator who's kind of relatively new to the field, to know entering a job at an institution that you kind of get to start from scratch. It's also really daunting. So I am lucky to have the team that I was able to work with on this particular project. So I'll focus in on one aspect of it. The American Art Galleries, there are 5 galleries total. It's about 9,000 square feet of space in the museum. And this was the first time that we had integrated the Native and non-Native collections together in those spaces and throughout the spaces. So there were so many amazing discussions and challenges and learnings from this whole process. So I'll share a bit about this installation by Henry Payer that's located at the center of the galleries. So how we approached this project was just starting an advisory committee and visiting and having lunches and traveling. The staff traveled quite a bit. But we have a Native Art Advisory Committee. It's 10 people, all from the region, from tribes in the region, from quite different backgrounds, educators, politicians, knowledge bearers. And it really took us 2 years to kind of get to what the core goals are and to see what the process would be. So we developed this together. These are the goals of the installation. Really, it's guiding our work moving forward too, through programs, through future exhibitions. So, we're like, okay, this is a lot to achieve in the installation, but let's see what we can do. So with the committee, we said, let's choose this space at the center of these 5 galleries. And the galleries are set up in a 1932 Art Deco building, according to this very traditional chronological art historical approach. So you're supposed to proceed through the 5 galleries from 1 through 5. So that the gallery at the center happens to be octagonal, so close to circular. And everybody felt that this is a significant space within the American galleries, and decided that that space should always be dedicated to Indigenous art and communities of the region. And that's thinking really broadly. We have a huge Maya community in Omaha. The city of Omaha is really intertribal, but we also want to respect, the Omaha Nation, whose lands the museum are on. So we had a lot of conversations about how do we center this first installation in the space, knowing that it will eventually rotate. It's in the middle of permanent collections, but it will rotate. And how do we do that in a way that's collaborative and meets these goals? So everybody knew that they wanted an installation that examines ribbon work applique and floral applique designs, which I know in Oklahoma, there are a lot of amazing applique artists here. There also are in Omaha and in present-day Nebraska. So I have 2 examples, one from around 1900 in Omaha woman's wearing blanket, and on the right is a wearing blanket made by a woman named Octa Keen, who is a really well-respected applique artist and elder within the Omaha community. Okay, so we knew applique, and we had our goals, but then we had to choose sort of a lead for the project. And we had lots of discussions about how to approach this, and the artist Henry Payer, his name came up again and again. And Henry is based in Sioux City. He studied at IAIA as well as University of Wisconsin-Madison. He's from the Winnebago tribe of Nebraska, so he's Ho-Chunk. And he creates these really amazing collages, paintings about the layered histories of the place we call Nebraska today. So this is an example that's in our collection, and he has just this huge personal collection of ephemera, postcards and newspapers and old Sears catalogs and everything you can imagine, and he starts to layer them. So this is a map of the state of Nebraska. And once you get into the imagery, you can start to see how he's mapping history onto this conceptual space. So we reached out to Henry. Henry was like, okay, that would be great. And we said, okay, we know this is an installation. The gallery is about 500 square feet. Where do you want to start? And the museum is home to the Bodmer Maximilian collection of watercolors and drawings. This is a group of watercolors made in the 1830s, early 1830s, when a Swiss artist and German artist traveled up the Missouri River all the way to present-day Montana, and as a result, painted a lot of riverscapes. And Henry said he wanted to look at this collection, which, the Bodmers are great. I'm always surprised people continuously want to engage this collection and have done it in such interesting ways. Every time an artist comes in, I just see the collection in a new light. And he was really interested in these riverscapes and kind of thinking about how Bodmer, he didn't really leave this steamboat. It's almost like he's kind of afraid, he's painting from the boat the whole time. So you see these landscapes that are oriented similarly. So Henry started pulling out the ones that were painted in present-day Nebraska on the Missouri River between where it hits the Platte and the Niobrara. So he narrowed it down to 8 watercolors, and then he knew he wanted to use these as the base for his collages. So we ended up, getting high resolution prints on canvas. He knew he wanted to make applique collages. He also has this amazing collection of archival documents, government documents related to his own tribe, as well as the Omaha tribe and other communities in the region. So he brought those in, scanned them, and started just making examples. What would an applique collage look like? And so this is one of 8 that he came up with, and it's absolutely beautiful. And the image that he's working with is of the Bellevue Agency, which is essentially now in present-day Nebraska. And throughout the whole project, we were working with a Native woman sewing group, and he was asking about, how Omaha women feel about the Bodmer collection. And he said, well, there's no portraits of us in this collection, except for this one. And you can see he's been really careful at how he's laid out his applique design to frame these two women. One's wearing a blue dress and that center diamond. And the Omaha women did most of the trading at that trading post. So when he started creating these applique designs and layering these histories together, he was thinking about how to take this a non-native's perspective of place and how to obscure it, but to also reveal new truths about that space, and to also take these documents and cut into them and make something beautiful and new out of them that's very much representative of the land itself. So I'm going to jump forward. So these applique designs, I know they mean different things to different communities and families, and there are so many different traditions of applique, which is one of the really beautiful things about it. Henry has a background as a TIPO, so he was doing research in museum collections for the Winnebago tribe of Nebraska, and said he's come across so many examples of satin applique, of ribbon work applique, and the artists, their names are almost never recorded. And he said one of his goals is to find out who these makers are. And so he's talked to a lot of applique artists. He himself makes his own regalia and has started to gather stories and get a better understanding of the different techniques and symbols. So, kind of broad strokes, you have these symmetrical designs that are representing sometimes plant medicines from the region. There's also a reference to water. They can be specific to a family, an individual, a community. The designs can be gifted, they can be passed on, they can be put to rest. So they have this really rich life. So the designs that he ended up using, some of which are with these, the treaty documents and the government documents, as well as some are made with calico, are based on ancestral designs. They're not copies, but they're in honor of these ancestor artists. So during the project, one of the overall goals was to have the installation be really collaborative and to have it do something. This organization called Healing Ribbons, they're quite new. They're based in Omaha. They grew from like 10 members to 60 members in a year. It's a women's sewing group that meets on Sundays. And they invited Henry in to talk about applique, and they ended up doing a workshop, and that turned into a couple more workshops, and which turned into Healing Ribbons contributing to the project in a number of different ways. These two images, this is probably one of the most rewarding moments of the entire reinstallation process. Any sort of project, whether it's a gallery installation or a play or a graduate school paper, you have those moments when you're just running on so much adrenaline and eating an entire pizza at the end of the day and just feeling like you're just running on all cylinders. And that's how I felt at this point. And Henry said he needed some help. He wanted to hand stitch all of the applique designs. And these are 3x4 feet. And there's 8 of them, which is just massive. And we had printing delays, and he said, I need some help. And I said, well, you've got this crew of sewers, let's have a party in the museum, and so for a week, women came in and men, and sewed. And just because of the spatial constraints of the institution where we were at in the installation process, it made most sense to set up in the galleries themselves. And once we set up in the galleries, it actually made the most sense to set up in the galleries, because suddenly for a week we had, all of these people chatting, making art. They're surrounded by, our installation team was actively installing the casework at that point in time. So the sewers were also visiting with us and taking breaks and kind of looking at, what's going on in view and talking about it. And it was just it was so comforting. It just felt amazing. And I feel like it opened up the space or inaugurated the space in a way that I feel like, especially with this symposium, after seeing a symposium started with a play, I'm like, you always need to have art as that starting point. So this is the gallery installation, and the colors really, like the photographs just don't do it justice. The way he decided to install the works is sort of in a panorama. So you start on the Platte and you go upriver. And, you know, now that I have been invited to participate in the symposium, you know, I didn't articulate it this way at the outset, but it really was an exercise in belonging and creating a space for belonging. And it always came back to water. And I've seen that in everybody's presentations, you know, it always comes back to water. So the Missouri River was really important. And this gallery, because it's at the center, you know, one of the things we all talked about with the women's sewing group, with Henry, with the advisory committee, is what the visitors' experience is going to be when they encounter this. Like where in their museum journey is this happening? And the museum doesn't have a lot of spaces to sit and to reflect. And it's also like you're coming from this gallery that's really bright, really big, really active. And so the overall sense was like this gallery is talking about the histories of forced removal. It's talking about loss. Like a lot of the sewers who contributed to this project didn't have experience hand stitching applique. So there's a lot of emotion in this space. So everybody agreed it should be calming. And it's kind of amazing to just watch visitors come through and just like sit and really spend time in this space. Another component of the project was to have applique wearing blankets on view. Part of this was so that people, when they were looking at Henry's collages, you know, if they didn't know what applique was, would have an understanding of where these designs are coming from, but also, you know, of course, to stress the continuity of this art form. So we went through a whole process of selecting the wearing blankets for display, and a woman, Octa Keen, came forward and asked if she could loan her wearing blanket, which was like it was an honor. It was awesome. And so we were installing this as the women were sewing, and it inspired an applique wearing blanket that they made for the museum. Another component, so this is Ingrid Cho on the right. She was curatorial assistant for Native American art at the museum. I have to just give a shout out to her because she was like amazing during this whole project. She recently got a job at Wind Cave National Park. But Ingrid did all of these oral history interviews throughout the course of the project. And this, you know, this whole process, nothing's like reinventing the wheel or new. I think it's new to the Joslyn, but it also developed really organically. So this is Pat Phillips. She's an educator at the Omaha Nation Public School. And she said she wanted to talk about applique. She's a great applique artist. And so Ingrid set up, and, you know, Pat just took out all of these. It's like a journal or her archive of applique designs. And she's made garments based on these designs. And she said, well, I don't really have the garments because they were given away, but she said, I have the designs. So with her permission and other storytellers and knowledge bearers' permission, we share these stories in the galleries on a touchscreen. This is the design for the touchscreen, so you can click on each person's design, and then it takes you to a page where you can hear audio and see images. And then yet another component. So this is where like this synergy, you know, in the last panel, kind of talking about magic and how sometimes things just come together. The group Healing Ribbons, towards the end of the project, they said they wanted to make their own wearing blankets, which for people who are beginner sewers, you know, some people in the group are very experienced. We had a lot of beginner sewers in this group too. Like that's a huge project. So people just like cranked it out and sewed constantly. So these are some of the designs and just the process. And we had a fashion show at the museum, which was just like, it was amazing. So this is the wearing blanket that's going to go on display next. We have to rotate these because textiles are light sensitive, but also like so many people wanted to participate in that. So we're like, okay, great. We'll just rotate it over the course of the year. But the fashion show, everybody showed the back of their designs, and then somebody read their artist statement about their designs. And it was an incredibly moving project. I think, and I'm interested to talk to Holly about this as we hear about her project. You know, about what when you have this moment at an institution, how do you continue that approach moving forward? Where I feel like in the middle of an installation and big, like total construction renovation project, it's almost like everything is so chaotic. So you have a lot of agency and autonomy to just do what you need to do. And it's the perfect time to just say, okay, we haven't done any of this before, but everything else is already new. So let's just do it and kind of make it the norm. So that's where I'm at now, and that's where our committee is at, is just seeing like, okay, everybody, you know, felt proud of this project and we're stakeholders in this project. How do we make sure that that continues moving forward? So thank you. I'll let you do the.
Okay, I'm cheating and I'm playing a video for part of mine. And then my slideshow I'll do after because I kind of freaked out after watching everyone else and I went, I gotta go add some slides. But let's hit, oh, where'd it go? I'm not. Her,
That's on like an extension screen, so you just have to look over
Oh,
there.
I have to look over
get
there.
rid of
Will
the
my
things.
PowerPoint show up over here?
It will once we
Okay, cool.
project it. Actually,
Okay.
let me come back.
We have a little technical assist right here.
Okay, so that's ready when you want
Okay,
to share
cool.
it after. And then
Go ahead and hit it.
You want me to play?
You
Okay.
got it.
The figure is primary in everything I do. There's always a figure. It's people, it's their stories. The stories are my reinterpretation of stories that I've heard of what I see my world as. There's always a heartbeat deep inside it. There's a universality because we're all people. I use kids' images because they're unguarded and they tell the truth. And they have so much to say, you just have to be willing to listen. How I carry my culture, it's not like right up in front. It's the stories and the stuff I grew up with that had meaning. I don't worry about the material that I'm using as far as defining my work, my art. It's more about what does this material say and add to the story. Like the stick people, it's this old story and it had this old meaning about you never follow a voice that calls you into the night. But my cigar figures are the reinterpretation of that. It's a story about family and it's about loss and journey and resilience. And so I try and figure out how some of these stories are echoing my today. And then I put my children's stories on top of that. People will come and see a piece and they put their story on top of ours. And so it's this way of connecting. I love clay because clay makes me think of skin. It reminds me of the body in a way that nothing else does. With what I do in metal and bronze and casting and even clay, it's so many layers of technique and time. And with encaustic or paint, you see it immediately. Like you see a color, you see something form. And so a lot of times I'll make a piece and I actually have to sit with it for a while to understand all the layers and all the elements and all the pieces and why they matter. I've started using glass that becomes a lens in which you can see through. There's the void of it. There's actually no figure in the lens. It's the absence of us, and that is a message for the fact that we are absent from our own land and our own history. I'm asked constantly, are the Delawares even still alive? And I'm like, well, you're talking to one. So I think so. We were in New York, New Jersey, and Pennsylvania, and You have rivers that are named after us, lakes and streets, parks, but we're not seen anymore. So it's this idea that we're gone, but we're not really gone. And so in this piece in particular, it's a young girl, and that idea, how can I be what I can't see, what you don't let me see, what isn't there? For me, I feel like I've been on a journey very slowly easing towards trying to find the bits and pieces of my history that have been lost because someone took them. And they made it so that I couldn't find it. I want to see through all this smoke and stuff to what was, because if I can't see what was, how can I have a conversation and how can I help shape what could be? Growing up, I never saw myself reflected back at me on screen or on the TV or in a museum. All I ever saw was this really historic view of what we were, and we were dead, we were subservient, and we were mute. We had no presence. I want my paintings to have a voice that's big and loud and noisy and full of color and light and love and hope and hope. Oh my gosh, so much hope. And I want it to be so large that you stop to look and you have to step back to see the whole thing. I want it to confront you and your preconceived notion of who I am, who my child is, what our history is, and where we're going. As you're looking at this generation of kids coming up now, there's a pride in who they are, but at the same time, there's these outside forces, even your own culture, constantly saying, well, you don't look Indian. What's your quantum level? What did you grow up doing? Nope, not quite enough, sorry. And it doesn't matter that they feel it from inside. We have put our kids in a place that they feel like they have to help defend against something that they should never have had to defend against. All the things that have been done, it's not like they can ever be undone, but there's a healing. They don't have to go through it. They don't have to feel it. They don't have to stand there and try and figure out whether to take it or to smile or to fight. And I think about all these kids have these dreams, kids have messages, and some will make it and some won't. They have so much power, you just have to be willing to listen. You know, we talk about futurism and native futurism, and I don't think of it as, 70 years in the future. I think of futurism as the next generation. And so what I need to do is be able to gather knowledge and information that I pass on to that next generation. Because futurism is that connection to who we are.
We thought the chickens needed a special moment. So I think I just hit presentation. I don't fall off the stage.
Okay, let's
I'm gonna let you touch it.
Let's escape out of that and then go here. And maybe that'll do it. Oops, let's not let that run in the horizon. We'll just close that.
Working backwards over our shoulder.
Well, maybe I just need to pull it over here.
Oh, there we go.
Let me just make sure it'll advance correctly for you.
Oh, I can
Yes,
go
it does.
yeah.
Perfect. Thanks.
Although I have one more question. How do I see it?
Oh,
Is it hidden? Or do
yeah,
I-
it's on this alternate screen now. I didn't know
Okay.
why it wasn't projecting anymore to the other one. Do you
So-
need it?
No,
Do you-
I can just kind of clickety click over my shoulder.
Okay.
Yeah. Sorry about the little technical issue. I threw a a video in the very end there, only because I just had it made last year and I felt like it had a lot of me working. And sometimes seeing just static images, you always have all these questions of what they are. And I'm not one who likes to sit in an audience and stare at one image because I'm like, what else is there? So I've loaded a ton of images into this presentation that are of my studio or of process. And this piece is one I specifically held for a moment because this talk is belonging. And I made these back, I think 15-ish. And it was originally from when we lived here in Norman, and they were these geodes that we found, and we cracked them open, and it was the inside of these things that my kids were so intrigued by that I then made a piece that was about the masculine and the feminine, and the two halves of the whole that make the self. And for me, I'm always trying to find where I belong, both as in a place and as in myself as a being. And so the geodes aren't actually glued, they're balanced. I build them on the rock. And at the end, they sit because that's where they fit. And I think I'm always looking for where I fit. And material for me, I originally went to school for photography. So you're going to see a lot of photos coming through here because I very much like to capture a moment that is gifted to you, that you see, and not everybody is going to see the same moment from the same angle and the same perception. And then you'll flash your thought of what that is to you and what it brings up in a memory. But for me, the photographs are what I started with. And when I went to art school, it was, I didn't want to lose that. I didn't want to lose what it is I loved about my photography because I knew I would be stripped down and rebuilt as an artist in the eye of what they consider proper art. And so I kept it as my own little secret. And I photographed my work and other people's work. And then I started photographing again when I had my kids. And these are all off the cuff photographs that they're in the moment. And it's either with an iPhone or I happen to be lucky to have my good camera with me that I would take. And what I found really intriguing is my photographs and my sculptures started echoing each other. There was the time at some points where it was intentional, and then there were some times that it was accidental. And I started noticing it doing slide talks that they were working in tandem with each other. And I love to show those aspects of them. And for me, my kids are the number one thing in my work, whether they're little or 20, because it's about them. It used to be about me. And as I got older, I started realizing, and I had my kids, everything for me is through the eyes now of how do I care for them? And how do I gift to them what is next in our world? There's lots of masks in my work, though we weren't I always thought we were because I grew up hearing stories of false face society and then realized, nope, that's not us. That was the neighbors. And not the neighbors like in Oklahoma, but in our homelands. But I would hear stories of it. But for me, a mask is the idea of an identity. You put on a persona so that you can go into the world to be something that maybe you have a hard time swallowing or holding on to do because of all the things that are coming at us or all the things that tell us we're not who we should be or who we could be or what could be better about us. And the photographs started coming into the sculptures. So that was a photograph actually of my daughter who didn't speak until after 3, but she wanted to be Deadpool. And so I thought it was hysterical. For her, that mask was, I don't talk, but I want to be the sassy person who does talk and tells everybody what to do and is an anti-superhero in a great way. I think my favorite part of this photo is the hand. And then the pieces, I also come from my own life. My mother died of a bladder infection. So never let a bladder infection get away from you. But they only saw her as an older, heavyset Native woman who they thought was drug seeking. And she was the most straight-laced lady you ever met. But when she was in the last 2 weeks, her body could come back, but she would never be there. She was already gone. And so the piece I built, not knowing, was called Should I Stay or Should I Go? Because it was, again, about that idea of how do you hold on to something, or do you stay, or do you go ahead and exit? And you can see in that the photographs also begin to echo some of the pieces. This is, I got a chance to do a residency. I was offered a residency at Crystal Bridges Momentary, and it was a chance for me to finally have quiet, where I didn't have to take care of a kid or a dog or a chicken or anything. And I started doing a lot of research, looking into our tribe, our culture, our beadwork, our history, to be able to put back into my work. Whenever I travel, I do, because that question of who are we, how do you carry your culture? And this photo was one that I did while I was at the residency. It was a photo I'd taken of my son, but he was just in a beach towel on the beach, and they're always being told they're not native by other people. And this was a bandolier bag strap thing that was at the Brooklyn. And so I started playing with the idea of, what if these are things that we carry, that we wear, that are like encoded messages of power? And so I started looking at these little images, these images from our beadwork, and I chose bandolier bags in particular. And the reason is the power that they are for what the object is. The object was something that was special. It was given an honor, and it carried something special. And so I think about my culture, and it's an honor, and it's something I carry, and it's very special. And so that is why I chose that specific material. I had some leftovers in here, so we're gonna get through them. Somebody earlier today mentioned how the spirit of the plants, the beings, and I almost started crying while you said that, because I think about that. I cast flowers and plants for the meanings of who and what they are. I'm going through these kind of quick. I've started also drawing the sculptures. So I'm doing portraits of the work itself, because I think of the work as people or as beings. And so I photograph them, and I photograph my work as if I'm photographing a person, because they are. And then I've started drawing portraits. So the other thing about the work is it's this idea of sewing. So you have pieces and you go into it, then you come back out, and then you add and you go back in. And so they become pieces that are back in and out and in and out of the history. This was something that I did recently, and it's called Lost in My History, because so much of my history was taken, and so much of my history is also frozen in a romanticized period, that it's hard to find who we were and where we were and what is our beadwork and what is our pattern. And some of the beadwork in there was actually strings of my father's beadwork that he had done, because he tried to teach, but when I was young, I didn't have time. And then as I got older, he passed before I could learn. And then trying to go through and find that history now, but now I don't have somebody that could teach me. Some of these are pieces you saw in the video. This is something that just recently hit me, and I only show it now because it's going to the paintings. This is a Frank Stella. And I saw this just like a week ago, and I looked at this piece and I went, who was looking at who? Because then you look at a bandolier bag pattern and you go, tell me that a person wasn't looking at this pattern work, but there's no mention on his card about any influence through bandolier bag or beadwork or Native history at all. This was a studio that I had in Crystal Bridges, and it also gave me a chance to work on other paintings, research, looking at old photographs, looking at language. There's a photo I took of my daughter. It was in the video. And for me, it was really important because this is when she wasn't speaking, but she had all her animals. And I think about the idea of our generation of kids that are coming out and what they care for in the environment. And that's what began that painting. And so the beadwork pattern I put behind it because, again, the importance of what it was. And then it's become a painting that I'm still working on. And then I love to show the studio. I now have concrete, so I don't look quite like a meth lab. This is how you cool off in Oklahoma. You jump into the pool. And then this is some of the most recent work I've done. I've started mixing a lot of material, and this is From Within We Are the Light. And it was me listening to my son talk about his new journey going to college and all the things he was going to do and what he was going to study. I get very emotional. I apologize. And so I was invited to do a clay piece, and I had just gone to Trenton with Laura Allen out of the Montclair Art Museum. And this is the very first time I ever saw, let alone touched, a piece of my clay from my culture in my entire life. I have never even seen it. And it just blew me away. And so this piece that I made, the figure is clay, and inside are nothing but shards of fired clay. And so I was kind of referencing the clay that I've never seen that's been hidden within me. And then the glass is like a lens that's blown up and it has air. So it's like the lungs. And then the stick represents this idea of this youth growing the next generation. And then the bird is for Oklahoma because it's a scissor-tail flycatcher. And the bird is sterling silver for the meaning of how precious he is. And then this is the project that I'm still finishing at the Montclair Art Museum. They asked me, and this is where we're kind of getting into the idea of visiting a museum and having a conversation. And they were like, here's this space and this sculpture. Now, not the ring, but just the sculpture. And what would you do? And how would you address it? And I have a real hard, I'm native, but I'm also Scottish and Polish and a few other things thrown in for good measure. And it was like, I can't hate half of who I am. And I can't destroy half of my history. So how do I make the two histories work together as one? And so this is a piece called Crown for the Victor. And it's this beautiful woman, and she is making this thorny crown for somebody, for something. I know the history somewhere, but I can't grab it. And what I thought of is when we have regalia made for us, my mom gave me a shawl she made. And I love when they dance and the movement of the shawl itself. It's like it's alive. And so this piece, we had a very small piece of steel done. I wanted the wires hidden. And that way, when you walk by, the shawl moves. But you can see the woman. I used an ecru. And in this process, I also found out that Supernaws outside of Tulsa is some distant relatives of mine. I'm like, yay, I got to go visit. But I wanted you to be able to see both my history and their history together, because I think the absence of both sides is the problem. It's not an either or. How do you show that we existed in time simultaneously as people? And so this was how I addressed that. And you can see where the windows are, and eventually, my glass will be installed in a window in this alcove, in this room. I know there's probably a fancy word for it. And the glass I proposed was, what I spoke about is that they are rondelles. I always think of like dances when you hear the word rondelles, like somebody doing a kick thing. But they're these circles that will cast the light. So all of the floor will be filled with these colors. And I looked at bandolier bag patterns. And then I also built the windows so that from the bottom, it is about the earth and the shells and the things that we stand on, and the difference of how one window is New Jersey in the north, and then the other window on the other side of the gallery is Oklahoma. So it creates a portal between our two spaces of where we were and where we were moved to. And so in each of the different windows are things that are important to those regions for us when we were there. And that way you can see, like, we have our feather capes, and then those are the beads of my family. This is Osage orange, which we use to make bows and arrows out of. Here, that piece is actually from the archive of the Montclair, and it's a piece that they would pull sinew. So you got to see something, and they wouldn't let me touch the actual object and make a mold of it. So I photographed it, created it in clay, then made a mold to be able to create the glass. And then these are the flowers of Oklahoma, the cone flowers that get the butterflies. And so then it's about pollination. And so in my windows, what I created is the earth, the water, the land, and the sky. And they go all the way up. They're like 108 inches by like 50 some odd wide. And this way you kind of see both parts. You enter through their new exhibition with that space. And then as you exit, I have a faux window that is a photograph I took of Oklahoma's sky, and then it has all the Oklahoma pieces to it. So that's kind of what I've been doing, because I think to make something that's about the land you stand on and about the people that lived here and the people who do live here and the animals, as much as the plants and what's happening now, are as important as something that's shiny. So that's where I'm at, but yay. Do you want to grab a chair? Did I go too far past?
No, you're great. Okay, perfect. And I'll get the microphone.
mic. There's one here.
Okay, thank you, Annika.
It's like a treasure hunt out here.
Okay.
Hello.
All right, it's just the two of us. I have a million questions for you, but I'm going to try and distill it to one question. What I was noticing as you were paging through all of the images, and you said you like to photograph your sculptures like they're portraits. And I love seeing how the light casts shadows, and some of the bronze sculptures, as they're affixed to the wall, they kind of change throughout the day. So you've been thinking about this idea of transparency and what it means to obscure or to hide. So I'm wondering if you can talk about the work at Montclair and how you're thinking about the shawl kind of developed. Like what were your initial impressions of that sculpture? And how did you arrive at what you arrived at? Because it's so beautiful.
Oh,
Yeah.
thank you. Well, there's a lot of people that have done work with shawls, so I didn't like pull a magic rabbit out of a hat. But what I found interesting was they wanted to know what I would do with her specifically. And the artist who made that piece made a beautiful piece. It's it's buttery, you want to hold it. It's all those things. But I tried to figure out if it was the glass that would cast a shadow on it, but it was the idea of having something that was specific to a cultural time period that would actually iconically make you think of something. And for me, we didn't go to a lot of powwows. Growing up, we did the Indian school at Fort Sill in Lawton, but we didn't go outside of that just because my parents were real like, we're not doing drugs or alcohol and crazy people and whatever, blah, 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 name a million things. But it was the movement that made you think of a person. And so that's what I thought of when the shawl fringe. And I had been working with beads, but beads are a different story, where the fringe itself covers a woman. You would wear it, you would put it around your shoulders, you would carry it. It's on things that does address the body. And the reason I chose the ecru is I didn't want it to be, my favorite color is red, but I didn't want it to obscure. I wanted it so that when you looked at it, the color itself, you saw through, and the whole figure was there, and it framed it, but at the same time, it showed movement. So that was kind of the deal. Thank you. Yeah.
When is this installation going to be complete? When can we see it?
So the shawl fringe is there. The photograph was installed. I have burned more cedar and smudged more sage in my studio than you would believe, because we had an entire kiln died and took like half of one of my windows with it. So we're hoping to have it finished in April is what my goal is at this moment in time, to have that done. So it is, because it's such a physical process. And I had done glass in 2017, just one little workshop, and went, oh, I love this, because I knew I wanted to mess with glass for the meaning of the material and what I could do with it, because it's a lens of your eye, it's a lens of glass, it's a lens through which we see. It has so many metaphors and meanings, and the idea of the absence of, so the void of the glass also was really important for me. But then from 2017, it took me until 2023 to be able to address it and say, you know what, this would be great. Because a lot of institutions, you have rooms that are completely in the dark. And so you can't have a window because it'll kill everything else in the room. It'll be just like zap, 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 zap. But with glass, the beauty of it is you can have your image. The sunlight does not affect it. It becomes a part of it. The casting of the shadows, the idea that through the day, the glass will cast a shadow that will move across the floor and then slowly up the figure and onto the shawl. And to me, memory is shadow. So I use shadows specifically in my work with the light, because I want you to see this idea behind it as memory. Because today you're going to remember I talked about this, and then tomorrow you'll think about what I said or someone else will say, and your memory will shift because it's like light, and the shadow shifts as the day goes. And so for me, I feel like I'm always trying to recreate a photograph in a three-dimensional setting, but that's still alive, I guess, is what I lately have been trying to engage with material.
Even just from the photos, I haven't seen it in person, but I get that sense. Just the fringe. I mean, it brings like breath into the space almost. Can we open it up to audience questions?
Is where my favorite part is where I'm like, Bueller, anyone?
Or is everybody ready for coffee?
I know. It's all like, we got it. She did a video. We're done.
Oh, thank you both so much. Holly, that was so powerful. And I'm not an art historian, so I'm sorry if this is, or an artist, or I'm not an art person, so I apologize if this is kind of a naive question. But in the video that you showed and then followed by the photos of your work, I was struck by how physical your art making process is. So as a non-artist art person, I kind of conceive of the artist as like sitting with a paintbrush and that is obviously not what you do. Can you talk about that, the physical part of your work, both in like the act of creating it, but also in the work itself?
It is 100% a workout every day. Although I fluctuate between veal, where you're sitting and you're not moving and I'm in a tiny cage. And then you're like, I got to lift 100 pounds of this and 60 pounds of this and do that. And that was one of the reasons I wanted, when we did this video, I was like, I can't be a bobblehead, because they're like, we need your face. And I'm like, no, you really don't. You need to see process. Because I think so many people forget how physical. I get so jealous of painters. When I get to paint, I'm all, and nothing wrong. Y'all are great. But I'm all like, you're just like, whoa, look at the little paintbrush that makes some color. Whoa, look at me. And you're not like, oh, dun. And I know you do more. But I get like, because I cut my fingers, the chemicals on your hands, the washing, your hand. It's just so much that you do, and you're masking, you're unmasking. I mean, we didn't even get into the welding aspect or the grinding or the sandblasting, because those are boring photos. But yeah, it is. And for me, I have issues with my hands, so I get trigger finger, and that's one of the reasons I'm a little delayed is having to have injections in your hands to keep your fingers moving, trying to stave off surgery, which I've had a few of. But it is, but at the same time, it feels good. I mean, it feels really good to be actively moving, and you're working with me. So I garden. All the plants I cast are things I grow for the most part, except for the things that I captured and brought back from New Jersey. That I wanted to be able to have, that were plants that were from New Jersey specific, but I grow them. So I'm outside and I'm taking care of plants as well as other things. So, and like the feather piece with the I'm More Than Fluff that had the feather girl, those are all from the chickens, so everything that I'm doing has meaning, it's like the hens coming home to roost, so yeah, but it is very physical. So my husband gets really happy when he gets to go to work on Monday, because he gets to sit. If he helps me over the weekend, it's like, okay, we're going to lift 60-pound cylinders out of a 1,300 degree kiln. And then you got to hold the back of this while I'm pouring the hot metal, which is 2,200 degrees. And I'm going to yell at you the entire time because it's really loud. It's like, I have to keep you going. So yeah, that's why the pool's there for the summer. That's how you cool off. You cast late at night, then you go jump in the pool.
Hi, thank you. I just wondered, do your kids, have they gotten the artistic bug?
So I have a son who's 20, and he has just recently gotten into sculpting some of the images he's making, because he's a storyteller. So he writes all these elaborate stories, because I was telling Eve's class yesterday, my studio was always part of our house. So only in this trailer setup am I separate, but I've always had a table. And so growing up, I heard them, and I would tell a story about a piece and they would tell a story about what they're doing. And it's this weird thing where they kind of blend it over. And so he's writing stories that have huge figures that are about my pieces. And now he was just telling me he's doing stuff in clay. He was so excited. And my daughter is an artist as well. She's going away this fall to art school, and her paintings and her drawings and her clay work, and it's hysterical. She's like, Mom, what do you think? And I'm like, do you want mom talk or do you want art talk? Because I'll be all like, the shadows are wrong here. This elbow is not in the right place. And you need to get some highlights over there, maybe a little here. And a couple of times in the very beginning, she'd be like, oh, okay. And I'm like, I'm just being like an art teacher. I'm so sorry. But they've been coming with me to all events. Like that's how we had a vacation, was I got to do an installation. So I had, 1 and 2 in tow, and we went to art museums all over the country, or we did Idlewild Summer Arts, and that was a way for them to get camp. And then I taught, and yeah, it's been really fun to watch them, because I was like, I want them to be them, but I love being creative. My dad was a painter. My mom did craft things, and my dad was told by his parents to stop messing around and get a real job. And so it was really sad that he never continued. And for me, that was a big thing, is they were like, you do what you love, because then every day you wake up and you're like, it's hard, but I love it. And I'm there intentionally. And that's what I've told my kids. I'm like, I don't care what you do, in a good way, but I want you to want to do it and love it. And it's been really fun to see them in those creative roles. And my son also does, both of them do music. But it was funny because Wilson was like, I am not going to do it for a living, because he's seen how it's hard to be an artist in the world. So I think America had a question.
Yeah, I'm worried about your hands. So I was wondering if you looked into acupuncture for them.
I haven't. I had surgery to release, but yeah, no, that'd be great. I'll check that out. Any help is always good help.
I have a question for Annika. In the non-native and native art collections. I'm excited that I read some amazing reviews. I can't wait to see it. And I'd love to hear if you have any anecdotes about challenges that you faced trying to navigate the kind of surprises that emerged as you brought artworks into shared space.
Yeah. So your mic was cutting out a little bit, but Emily was asking about insights, just a little bit more about the reinstallation process, especially with the project to integrate the native and non-native art collections. One of the challenges is paint colors. And I know that sounds like picky and minor, but we really duked it out over paint color. And I think, we being the small but entire curatorial team, and I think that it comes back to, the galleries are set up and the lighting is set up, and it's in the structure of the space to exhibit paintings. And even kind of the colors that people gravitate towards, like in one gallery, we have a lot of beadwork on hide, and it's like that hide can't be against a gold color, like it needs to pop, so it's finding that color that brings a lot of different media together. It's paintings, it's beadwork, quill work, hide painting. So it was nuances like that where I anticipated like a fight in a lot of different ways that I just didn't encounter. Everybody was like down to experiment and try new things, but then it's like the logistics of it. And similar with casework, we didn't want it to be like, most of the native art is 3D, and those are painting galleries. And we didn't want to just have like all of the regalia and garments just in a case in the middle of the room. It's like you want spatially to have people experience these moments. So, we're learning lessons where I am very much a person who doesn't like vitrines or bonnets on cases. So we have a bandolier display that doesn't have plexi over it, which is like everybody loves it and everybody touches it. So, I'm also learning that, and I think it's because people see beadwork on bags and they see them as more like familiar items, like they're garments. It's not, they know not to touch a painting, but the beads are also kind of like, for I think a lot of our visitors, seeing beadwork in that context is new. So, now now that the installation is up, we have to think about ways to kind of educate visitors, but to also kind of answer those tactile questions that I think people have, but to also kind of let the cultural belongings breathe a little bit. We need to protect like smaller items. We just have to have them in a case. But so we have a few open platform displays with garments, which has been like amazing, really refreshing.
Something on that note that I've done, the Michener, and then I'll do it with Montclair, is the Michener commissioned me to give them sell them pieces of things that are parts. And that way their visitors can have something to touch, because it is people want to touch, especially sculpture, like so bad that you're just like, I really need to slap you in the head. I actually wanted to do something where it was like a thing that if you crossed a line, it would be like, step away from the artwork. That it would like an audio, because I think that would be really hysterical. Because it'd be like, oh, I'm so sorry, because it's a handsy. But if you had a display that had beadwork that you commissioned, and I do think that's important, is to pay the person so that it's something for people to feel. At the Michener, when they did the exhibit, I can't remember the name. Anywho, they had baskets of beads for people to put their hands in. And so it was so satisfying for them. And then for the glass work, I'm going to give them a piece of glass, very well ground, so it's not sharp, so that people can feel and hold and understand the void and what, glass is. So I think that would be the other thing to add to exhibitions. So
I love that. And having like a workshop commissioning items for people to be able to touch in the galleries.
And that it could be near the exhibition, so it's not like on it, but it's like, okay, here's a little note, here's something. And that's what I've seen that a few different times. And it can be educational, but it can also then be for visitors on dual points.
Yeah. Well, and I think that tactile aspect too, it's a way of learning. So for people to have to sit with the materials, like you know materials, but to have people just like experience those materials, I think they're getting so much information that you just can't take in visually. So I like this idea.
Just looking at the clock, we need to move on to our 20-minute coffee break. Thank you so much, Annika and Holly, for sharing this conversation. You will find coffee upstairs in the Cup of Jones, and we will rejoin here at 3:45 for the last panel in this space.
Well, what you could do is actually do it enough where like the back is blue, and then and then that is a big thing. So
Yeah, and it's I've thought so much about this, like why do visitors? Why are we just having this